Hi, and welcome to the show. Rate and review at kevinmd.com/rate. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Today on the show, we have Harry Nima Zegarra. He's a critical care physician, and we're going to talk about his Kevin MD article, A Case Against Real Estate Syndications. Harry, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me here, Kevin. Very excited.
So we'll get into the article in a little bit, but please share with my audience your story and journey to where you are today.
Yes, absolutely. So my wife and I, we both are physicians. We actually are from South America, from Peru. So we did our medical education over there, like our medical school. And then we came here about 15 years ago, like to continue our training, right? Like in my case, it was internal medicine and then like a fellowship. In my wife's case, it was like family medicine, right? Like, and then because of the same nature of our training, I mean, we're in different areas. And we started my career as a home critical care doctor, like in South Texas. And then about 5 years ago, we moved here to Dallas Forward. And then we liked the area and they just decided to stay here. And that was like almost like around like the same time when we decided like to what you may call like look outside Wall Street and start like investing in real estate. So like that's part of also like the article that we're going to talk about today, right? Like, so we do in residential and also commercial real estate.
Sure. So how did you get interested in that?
Yeah, so we have like interest in that like for a long time. I mean, actually, myself, I'm first generation college educated. So like my family didn't have like the opportunity like initially like to go to college or to have like a higher like education. So I was witness like from them like to do different thing, business, like including like real estate, right? Like yeah, like and you can imagine like in a third world country like Peru, like real estate is different as here, right? They had already like the idea. So like when we came here, like already I was very primed and interested. It just was just a matter of like education and how to do things here in the US.
And where did you get education on real estate? I talk to a lot of physicians who do a lot of real estate on the side, and I always like to hear their story about how they learned from this, because obviously this isn't something that's being taught in medical school and residency. How did you learn?
Yes, like the same as real estate is not taught, like also like financial education is not taught in medical schools, right? Like so it's kind of different and difficult effect like for many of us to get started. I guess like my path was kind of similar as many doctors who started in this. So just mainly doing like a podcast and doing audiobooks, going to conferences, going to local meetups. Again, like I started doing that like when we arrived to here, Dallas Fort Worth. And the reason was like because we were like because of the training, we were moving every 2 or 3 years, right? Like so like initially we felt it was not possible, right?
So when you say that you're doing real estate as part of your professional career in conjunction with what you do in critical care, what exactly do you do in real estate currently?
Yeah, so we have done like two things, like residential real estate. So we have properties here in the Dallas Fort Worth area that we manage like with a property manager. So like the buy and hold, like long-term rentals. And in the last couple of years, we have been involved in commercial real estate in apartment complex syndications.
And how much time does it take you per week, would you say, to manage your real estate properties?
Yes, so we are grateful. Like again, like we have a good manager like on the residential side, but it's still and I always heard like having rental properties is a passive investment. It is not, right? Like
Yeah.
because like there are many things like involved in that, and even with a great property manager, you still like need to. I mean, all the decisions, all the responsibilities and liabilities are on you, right? Like, and
Yeah.
if I mean, and sometimes I hear like people are say like, so the rental properties are a passive investment. I always think like either they're lying or they haven't been like enough like in this field like to know better, right? But yeah, like in our case, we like in my case specifically, I'm like the most active in this field. I probably spend about like 10 to 15 hours at least a week.
All right. So let's talk about your Kevin MD article, A Case Against Real Estate Syndications. Now, before going to your article, for those who aren't familiar with that term, what exactly is a real estate syndication?
Yes, and that's like an important topic. So how we always get started, like because we have heard like even in people who are investing in real estate, for example, in single family homes or fix and flips, they haven't heard like this term, correct? So mainly real estate syndications mean group investment, right? Like so like a group of people with a similar interest that want to buy a property or an asset or anything in general, they get together like and they pour like the resources and they buy these big assets, which otherwise they wouldn't be able like to buy.
All right. Now, how did your article come together?
Yeah, so like as I was mentioning, like in the last couple of years, we have been passively and also actively investing in this field, right? Like in syndications. And one of the important things when I talk with friends, with colleagues, and even with investors is that, again, like we need to be honest and we need transparent about like any investment, right? Like, and there's no such as perfect investment. So that's what I came like out like with this topic, just to tell like everyone, like, again, like the good things about like syndications, but also other things that they may decide is not a good investment in that moment, or like not at all, right?
Yeah. So when it comes to real estate syndications, particularly, tell us what are some of the downsides to real estate syndications that you talk about in your article?
Yeah, so some downsides or some things that you should consider delaying an investment, right? Like, so for example, the first point is like it's an illiquid investment. So which means like, again, like if you go in these kind of projects, in these indications, you need to think about it as a project like for the long term, right? Like, so they usually are 5 to 6 years. It's not like, for example, like stocks or REITs or mutual funds that if you change your mind like next week or next month, you can sell that very easily. Even in real estate, if you, for example, if you own a house, a rental house, if you decide like to sell the house, if you decide that you don't want that investment anymore, you can try to sell your house and you can get your money back in a couple of months, 1, 2, or 3 months. In syndications, it's different, like because your money is put with other investors together and they're in like this asset. So when you go like in these kind of projects, in these kind of investments, you need to think about that. And it's important, like because life happens and things happen, right? Like, so for example, you may need like to buy a car next year, or you need like to make a trip like to your home country or things like that, right? Like, so that's one of the important things. Like the second thing is that also, even for high earners or high income professionals or physicians, it's a big investment, right? Like, so if we're talking about like in general, like the investments are for $75,000 to $50,000 minimum, it's a big investment even for physicians. So you need to think about that. You need to be safe for you and for your family to have like the reserves, like at least, as we always say, like 3 to 6 months, and think about these things, right? Like, so like the next point, it's also, again, like that as its name says, it's a passive investment.
Yeah.
And there's not such, I mean, we always talk about that. There's not such passive investment 100%, right? Like, because before you taking the decision, before signing documents or sending your capital, you need to do your due diligence, right? Like, you need to have vetted like the sponsor, you need to review all the projections, all the presentation, all of that, right? But once you do that, once you have decided, once you have signed the contract, or what we call the PPM or private placement memorandums in your funds, then it becomes passive, right? And that may be a good thing or a bad thing for many people, right? Like, so there are many people, like especially us, like physicians, we many times we prefer to have control over things, right? Like we're control people, right? Like, so it's different than when you own a rental property. So for example, you cannot take like the decisions on how to screen tenants or when to do the renovations or even like when to sell or refinance a property. So, but if you think about like, I mean, on the flip side, it may be a good thing, like because you're leaving these to a professional team, right? Like to someone who's doing this every day, who does this as a full-time job and has been doing that for many years, right? And the last thing, again, like as we like, I guess as we started like the conversation, is like many people, they haven't heard about like the term syndication, right? Like, so even the word is just a scary thing, right? Like, so, and syndications, honestly, they have been around for a long time, for decades, actually. I mean, I was actually like a couple of days ago just reading that the Empire State Building in New York was sold and bought like in the 60s through a syndication, actually, right? So it's a new term. So it's something that you need to learn. And what is important is that we tend to feel comfortable or invest at the end in things that we're familiar with, right? Like, so if we're not familiar with with syndications, it's going to be like less likely that we're going to be able like to invest in those, right? Like, it's kind of like different as the stock market, for example, right? Like we hear about like this every day and the media and all of that, and we receive emails about that. So I mean, we're more familiar with that. But again, it's just a matter of education.
So if I'm a clinician and I have some capital that I want to use to go into real estate, what other options are there other than syndications?
Yes, there are several actually, and that's why, as I was telling you, we love real estate, but it's not the only option. It's not the only way. We love syndications, but it's not the only options, right? Like, and in real estate, for example, there's so many ways to invest, right? Like, you can do fix and flips, you can do rental properties, you can buy land, you can even to lending of your money, even like kind of similar as in syndications, how to pull your capital or equity together with other investors. You can also, so for example, like invest in ATMs, in energy, in oil, in mobile parks. So different ways. So, but the most important, and sometimes that can be, I mean, I would say like overwhelming, right? Like,
Yeah.
like because there are so many options, right? Like, but it's just a matter of like education and just to try to take like your time to get educated and to know a little bit more about how this works, right? Like, and once you have a little bit more of certainty of how's the process and how that works, you can start like talking with other people who have invested in that before. You can start talking with syndicators or operators and to give you options. That's mainly, right? Like because what we do mainly is just like again, like to invest in the stock market and in our 401ks, and we think that's it, right? But there's so much more out there.
Now, in terms of the returns, can you contrast the returns from a typical real estate syndication versus some of the other options that you mentioned?
Yes, yes. So again, like the real estate syndications, how the structure is usually like a project that is not short term, is long term, is for 5 to 6 years, right? Like, and there's two ways that you get like the returns, right? Like one is through cash flow, and the other one is like with the equity at the end of the project when you sell the property, right? Like, so those together, I mean, and it's kind of like we could use like another like episode like to discuss about like the structure, right? But those together is what syndicators or operators aim like to get a return is like about like a 15 to 20% a year, right?
Wow.
Like, so over like the life of 5 years to 6 years, we aim to get like the returns from 80 to 100%. So now that changes, right? Like because in the last 3 to 5 years, as we say, like it has been like the golden age of real estate, right? Like, so we were saying ridiculously high like returns, right? Like, and everyone was thinking that, yeah, I mean, like you can make those returns in even like in 3 years or less. It's not necessarily like the case. Those are like deceptions actually. And actually that changes also with when market changes, right? Like, so we're now like in a downturn, like, and we're about like to go in a recession. So that's why also is the responsibility of the operator or syndicator to tell their investors or people who are interested in investing in that and to be aware of those things, right? Like, so kind of similar, right? Like, so for example, we were talking in other types of investment like ATMs or mobile parks. The returns are kind of similar in some of them. So for example, like in ATMs is more cash flow heavy, right? Like, and at the end, like the equity when you sell, like the investment is not as high, but it's kind of similar, like the return. And also like in mobile parks, the returns may be higher, but what we always need to think about is like to weight these things, right? Like returns versus also like the risk profile of your investment, right? Like, so again, like, so it's like it's important to have options. It's important to get educated about these things.
So when you say ATMs, what exactly do you mean by those?
It's like the cash machines, like
Okay.
where you put your debit card and you get like the money
So
there.
you could invest in those.
You can invest in those too. Yes, and there's even funds about that.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
So I think one of the biggest downsides to me for syndications is your first point in that they're illiquid. Your money is really tied up for 4, 5, 6, 7 years. Now, with these other direct investments, are you saying that your money is more liquid?
Yes. So for example, like, so we were talking about funds in ATMs or so the syndications in mobile parks are kind of similar, right? Like, so every syndication is kind of similar. In theory and legally, you could take your money out, but it's very difficult. It takes time and there are many fees involved, like to the point, like, again, like we always tell our investors that it's preferred not to do it. In terms of funds, that there are also funds for real estate. There are also funds for ATM, for oil and gas. There are different structures. There are some structures that are more kind of strict, where it like mirrors a little bit more about like the syndication. But there are other funds that are more open and more flexible, in which case you can also take your money, not necessarily in a couple of days, but in a couple of weeks to a month.
Now, to those new clinician real estate investors, to me, I get the sense that syndications probably has the least amount of friction in terms of investing, right? You just give your money up front and they'll take care of it and they'll give you some cash on cash return. And then, about 5, 6 years, hopefully you'll get your capital back. Now, for these other investments that are more independent, these direct investments, how can one go about learning more about who's reputable? Like, where does one even start in terms of looking for these real estate investments outside of syndications?
Yes, and that's, I believe, like some of the barriers and why many of us we're still hesitant like to do these other types of investments, right? Like, and honestly, it takes time. Honestly, it also takes a leap of faith, right? Like, so you still need to start talking with other investors like yourself or myself, like and see how was their experience with these other like investments, right? Like, and truth to be like honestly, not every investment is going to go the right way, even like our best intentions, right? Like, but and again, as I was telling you, like in terms of single family homes, for example, like there's always going to be like a problem and there's going to be like a bad investment, but we need to see the communication that your sponsor or your operator has with you, right? Like, so like the operators that are the ones who respond to you, that explain to you, and in case that there's a problem, they make the right steps to fix that problem and the steps to prevent that problem to repeat.
Now, how about some resources that you recommend for those clinicians interested in some of those investments that you're talking about? What are some recommendations you have?
Yes, yes. So again, like the most important thing for anyone, and in my case was also like the part of the education. There are so many free resources out there, like in YouTube, like in podcasts, bigger pockets, like different like platforms that where you can get educated, right? Like so, like that's the beauty about like our age, that there's so much free information and free education, and there are also like not that expensive, like education, right? Like so that we can take advantage of.
Now, how long did it take you to educate yourself before you began deploying capital and investing in real estate? How long did it take to educate yourself?
Yes. So what I was telling you is again, like I was like in training and in different areas. So like I was ready to get it to get it started, but like because we were moving every couple of years, we couldn't do it. But usually when I have like discussed with other people who do this in residential, also in commercial, like usually a couple of months, like 3 to
Yeah.
6 months until they feel more comfortable, until they have talked with other people, until they have talked with sponsors or syndicators to feel more comfortable about that.
We're talking to Harry Nima Zegarra. He is a critical care physician. His Kevin MD article is titled A Case Against Real Estate Syndications. Harry, tell us some of your take-home messages that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience.
Yeah, so like again, like there's this need for us, especially that we spend so much time like in medical school and in training, and then when we finish all our training, we're not that literate like in financial and in ways of education, of investing in education, right? So we need to try to get educated ourselves, look outside the box, look outside Wall Street, and see that there's other options out there, right? Like, and it takes a little bit of effort at the beginning, but again, at the end, it's worth it.
Harry, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight, and thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you, Kevin. It was a pleasure.